Hi there, my name is Mike Montgomery, and today I want to show you how I built this mid-century modern inspired slatted coffee table on Modern Builds.
A month or so back, I got the opportunity to do a meet and greet at the Rockler store in Frisco, Texas, and while I was there, I couldn't help but go through the lumber section. They've got a lot of really cool domestics like white oak and walnut, not to mention a ton of exotics like purple heart and wenge. They've got some really cool materials for smaller projects, as well as a ton of turning blanks, bowl blanks, and some really interesting pin blanks, as well as some really unique one-of-a-kind slabs. So I've had this project idea in mind for a while, and my initial idea was to use 2x construction pine material. But since I was here, I figured I might as well get some really high-quality walnut and make this piece look great. And after my new buddy Joe rang me up, it was time to head back to Oklahoma. And with all of my materials back in my shop, I went ahead and planed down all the boards smooth and flat. Then I cut them into 3-inch strips. Next, I set up a stop block on my miter saw and cut all of my slats to length. 8/4 walnut is not cheap, so I went ahead and made a 0 insert plate for my circular saw based on this video by John Peters, as well as used masking tape on the back of my pieces to prevent any more tear out as well. And with all my slats cut to length, I set up a stop block that was exactly as long as my 3-inch strips were wide. That way I was cutting 12 3-inch by 3-inch spacers. Then, with the rest of the offcuts, I could cut my 4 legs.
Okay, so I've got a little bit of a problem, but I've already come up with a solution, which is really simple. Whenever I laid all my pieces out, I realized it looks a little squatty, like it's a little too wide for the length that it is. So all I'm gonna do is just take out one of the slats, and I think it looks absolutely perfect.
Next, I needed to cut the corners off of each of my slats 2 inches from that inside corner. So I set up a quick stop block, and notice that I make sure and let my blade stop all the way before I pull that piece out, because it could get jammed in there and cause some issues otherwise. Here I'm just marking the location where I'm going to be drilling the holes for the maple dowels to run through. So what I did here on my drill press is just make a really quick temporary fence and stop block. That way I can make all of these holes really repeatable. And I'm using a 1 1/4 inch Forstner bit. This little piece of hardboard underneath each of my slats is there so that I don't get blowout on the bottom side of my slats. Once I drill one hole, I can move it to a new location. That way I always have a fresh board underneath my hole. Then I got a spacer block, found the center of it, and set up a new stop block. That way I could drill a hole in the center of each of my spacers. And with all that done, I could go ahead and sand everything up to 220 grit before assembly.
Alright, so I just got done drilling all of the holes for the dowels, and I realized that I'm not drilling straight. My drill press and my drill press table are not perpendicular, which is not a good thing. Essentially, it's trying to make my whole tabletop twist because those holes aren't straight. But I think I've come up with a solution. If I drill out the holes about 1/8 of an inch, that should give enough wiggle room for the dowel to be able to slide through and out the other end. At least I hope.
So I drilled out all of my holes in the spacers and the inside slats and made a recess on my 2 outside boards and tried to put everything together. Unfortunately though, everything didn't quite line up because of the angled hole on the outside slat. So I just used a file to flatten that out.
It worked, thank goodness.
So I clamped everything up without any glue to make sure everything would line up right, and once I knew it did, I used marks to make sure I would line everything up once I put it together for good. Now my microphone battery died here, but essentially what I'm saying is that the dowels are able to move freely through the holes, which is really good, and there's absolutely no wiggle room between the 4 corners, which means that the tabletop is really flat. Before I glued everything up though, I went ahead and drilled holes for the dowels that the legs will be using to attach to the tabletop in the 4 spacers that it needs them in. And once all that was done, I could go ahead and clamp everything up, with glue this time. And if there's one piece of advice that I can give for this project specifically, it is to not use too much glue. Glue squeeze out in the corners of each of these slats is basically impossible to clean up, and took me about a full day to do. So make sure you use glue sparingly, and using a little bit of table salt between pieces that you're gluing up, especially when you have a lot of pieces glued up in succession, will help it keep from sliding around too much. And once I had all of my pieces clamped in, I came back and cleaned up as much glue as I could. If I were to do this project again though, I would use a ton less glue. That way I actually didn't have any squeeze out. That way I didn't have anything to clean up, because it's basically impossible to get everything in all of these corners. Then I went ahead and cut all of my dowels flush with a Japanese pull saw, and then used a belt sander to flatten all of the surfaces. I just had a really good straight edge as a reference and sanded until I had everything flat. Then I used a straight edge and my circular saw to cut my two ends square. Make sure and use a lot of masking tape, that way you don't get any tear out. And with my tabletop done, I could move to the legs. The legs are going to taper from 3 inches to 1.5 inches at the bottom, and I'm using this straight line tapering jig from Rockler to do it on my table saw. Now this jig makes it really quick and really safe to make tapers on the table saw.
And one of the really cool things about it is it makes repeatable cuts super easy. Just take off these clamps and slide your new piece in. And you're ready to go.
And I'll have links to all the products and materials I'm using in my written article and in the description. And with all the dowel holes drilled, the legs were done. This walnut is really beautiful as is, so I just went with a really simple, natural Danish oil finish. It's a super easy 2-step process that is really hard to mess up. Now I know this is out of order, and I don't know why I accidentally put the finish on before I glued the legs in, but that is what I'm doing now. And I'm using masking tape just to protect the finish and the wood around it, that way I don't have as much to clean up later. Once the legs dried, the coffee table was complete. And I really gotta say, I love how this came out. This is probably my most authentic mid-century inspired piece that I've done yet, and I'm just really happy with how it came out. And I want to give a big thanks to Rockler for supporting this content and sponsoring it.
So thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that thumbs up. That lets me know what kind of projects you guys are into and what you might want to see next. Also, if this is your first time to my channel, I want to say welcome, as well as please subscribe, because I try and put out a new project video every week, and you'll definitely want to stay updated with those. I also want to give a huge thanks to everyone that's already subscribed and has been watching and supporting my channel. I've had a lot of growth lately with Modern Builds, and I really owe that all to you guys. I appreciate all of you sharing, liking, commenting, and showing your friends my videos. I don't want to get super sentimental, but I just want to say thank you all very much for the support, and I really appreciate it. And if you want to keep up with me throughout the week, Instagram is the best place to do that. That is where I post most often and where I'm most easily reached. Thanks again everybody for watching, and if you plan on building this, don't forget to check out the written article, and if you have any questions, make sure and leave me a comment. I try and answer all of those. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next week on Modern Builds.